Hi there. Hey, welcome to my workshop. Ben Olson here, and in this video you're going to see how I created the final two scenes of my layout, the schoolhouse scene and a park scene. So I'm going to take you from beginning to end on those scenes in this video. Now, because I'm putting two scenes together in one video, the length of this video is a little bit long by most standards. So for your musical enjoyment, I've added an intermission piece right in the middle of the video. I hope you enjoy that musical piece as well. So anyway, if you're ready to get started, we can go. And oh, by the way, I'm in my old age now, I'm getting really lazy, so I've wired everything to be voice activated. So Alexa, turn on the trains. See ya. Well, my inspiration for the schoolhouse scene actually came from the one-room schoolhouse that I attended in first, second, and third grade. It was a Hazel Dell grade school in Kenosha County, Wisconsin. That's actually a photograph of me in my class. I'm first row by the window, third seat. That's me. And that was my inspiration for this scene. So I started out with a template that I cut out of styrofoam, as I've done with other scenes, and this allows me to work and create the scene on a workbench, which is a lot easier than doing it on the bench work with the railway system. So at this point, I'm kind of planning out where everything's going to go, the schoolhouse and the road that's going to run through here and everything. And one of the things around the schoolhouse, that scene that I want to make, is a fence. And this is the fence that I got. It was a German-made fence for HO scale and really nice quality stuff. The only thing was that the fence was kind of shiny, and in real life, that metal fence was kind of a dull gray. So I painted the fence with the stone gray paint from Woodland Scenics to give it that faded gray look, and that makes it look a little bit more realistic. Well, now that I've got the fence work done, I had to pop a couple of holes in the template because I have wires that are going to run from the schoolhouse and there's a gooseneck light on the schoolhouse as well that's going to run through here. And Grandma's house at the other end is going to be lighted. So I have all these light fixtures that are going on, and I popped the holes in the template for that. And now I want to start laying down some of the ground cover work. And to do that, of course, you're just laying down some scenic cement, brushing it out, and sprinkling on the ground cover wherever it is that you want it to go. This is helping me plan out where things are going to go in terms of buildings and the road itself and things like that. While that's drying, I had to go back to the layout and finish this mountain scene. I had to do a little bit of painting, add some ground cover to complete that before I put the insert back in. And then back at the workbench, I'm completing the school scene. You can see I have the fort and the flag and some kids playing on swing sets and all of that good stuff. I've also added the gravel road that runs through this scene over to Grandma's house on the far right, and on the left, if you take the left fork, that ends up going to the park scene. I wanted to add some railroad crossing lights, but boy, they were a project. I am not an electrician, and the wiring was some kind of a challenge for me, but eventually I got it all together. I did not get them to actually flash. I have to calibrate them in order to do that, and this is the control box that I've mounted underneath the bench work to those flashing railroad crossing lights, so I have to calibrate it yet. But boy, that was a project, let me tell you. Back at the workbench, I'm completing the schoolhouse scene. I have the fort made, the flag up, trees in, and now what I'm doing is creating the scene and the trees in the park that was just adjacent to the schoolhouse. You can see I've already put in the pathway there that the kids used to walk on to get to school, and I'm taking every individual tree and shaping it to the size that I want, and then gluing it into place. So as you can imagine, this took me quite some time. In fact, to do all of this that you're seeing flash up here on the screen. It took me about 2 weeks. On the gravel road scene, of course, just as with other parts of gravel road, like I did with Prairie Road, I wanted to put in a dirt shoulder. So I'm brushing on this material that gives that impression of a dirt shoulder along this road that runs through the schoolhouse scene as well. Well, now it's time to insert the template into the scene itself. On the workbench on the railway. And it's a project because you have all these wires that have to go through the bench work down underneath to where all the connections are. And you have to do that very carefully because if you're not careful, you can destroy some of the hard work that you've already done in creating this scene template. So it's takes a little bit of time to make sure things get set in there right. But it looks like my measurements were correct and everything got put in there. On the other end of this template is where Grandma's house is going to be, and there's a car that's going to be at Grandma's house as well. Now, as you look at this, I'm actually making an error here. There's a hole in the template where the wire was actually supposed to go through the hole you see in the template, and I forgot to do that. So once all this gets put down, you're going to notice that eventually I'll have to pull it up again. Where are all those wires going? To the port sharing devices, the PSDs below. This is what the wiring looks like. And I've got quite a bit of lights going on. And the question comes up, well, what happens if one of these lights go off? How do you find the light and the line and everything to replace it with all those jumbled wires below? Well, what I did is I created a lighting reference chart, put it on my master planning board, and I have it right up here. And I'm going to show you how I can use that master planning chart to locate and repair any light that gives me trouble in the future. I have a total of 49 lights on this layout. So there's a lot to keep track of. But here's the lighting chart that I created. Let's say that gazebo light goes out. Well, the gazebo is wired to lighting hub number 1. So I go back to my control board, find lighting hub number 1. There it is. And it's on line number 4. So there's hub 1, and I just go to line 4. That's what's giving it its power from the main control board. Now I know that it's wired to a port sharing device or a PSD, and it looks like PSD2 line number 1. That is going to be underneath the bench work. So I have to locate that. I go back to my planning board, and I can see that both PSD number 1 and number 2 are located underneath the Whispering Creek scene. So I can go back underneath the Whispering Creek scene and find those PSDs to track down the wire to the gazebo. There's port sharing device number 1, and if I back up just a little bit, there is port sharing device number 2, and line number 4 is the line that's going to the gazebo light. So once I figure all that out, I could replace that light if I needed to quite easily, and it would be working again. So this is what it's looking like once it's installed. I have some of the lights on, and there's still some parts of the scene that I need to add here. I'm going to add a lemonade stand over by the mailbox by Grandma's house. I'm going to add a roadside fruit stand by this pole light. Some kids are going to be flying kites out in the park and things like that. You're going to see all of that in a little bit. But about 90% of it is done. And I have the railroad crossing lights installed, and they do work. They don't flash, but they do work. Well, that's part 1, and we're going to get into part 2. But first, I'd like to give you this public service message about social distancing.
At home on their computer with their screaming kids and burnt out spouse. Got rubber gloves and hazmat suits, but there's no toilet paper in the house. We're sanitized and isolated alone, living on lockdown in a home wall. But Death Valley be a good battle line. A tent right in the middle would suit me just fine. I wouldn't have to wash my hands 50 frickin' times. I'm so tired of counting to 20, but it's keeping me alive. We don't need the human touch, we're all free. From the human touch, get my weed. Yeah, I don't need much if we would seed. If we just don't touch a social distance, that's what I do. Yeah, social distance. And you should too. No, I don't touch my face. I use my elbow when I need to sneeze. And if I cough out on the street, people look at me like I'm diseased. I can get tested, but Trump said that I could. I can get one anytime. Yeah, I'm sure that's true. The stores are empty of the stuff I like. My only option is a hunger strike. I've canceled all my classes and I'll put away my mic. Yeah, I really need a haircut and so does my wife, but we don't need the human touch, we're all free. From the human touch, get my weed. Yeah, I don't need much, we'll succeed if we all don't touch, so keep your distance. Don't be a fool. Keep your distance. And I'll keep mine too. Oh, social distance keeps us healthy and cool. Social distance, it's what we gotta do. Stay healthy out there.
Well, there you go. That's your public service announcement for the day. Now we're in part 2 of the video, and we're going to go to see how we built the grill and chill park scene. I've got my template cut out and painted and sealed. I'm going to be putting in a fishing pond in the corner, so I'm cutting all that out of the styrofoam, and I'll be sealing that up with some plaster, as I've done with other water features that you've seen on other videos. And putting down some glue because I have to lay down the gravel. This is going to be the parking lot that leads into the park. And I have to start painting the shoreline for the pond. So I'm going to be using the yellow silt paint that I've used in other areas of the layout to get the shoreline in. And then I'll be using the deep blue paint to get the rest of the water in. Obviously, all of that is done after it's dried for 24 hours, is when you start doing all the painting. So one of the challenges I had on this scene is supposed to be on a windy day. And so I had to show some water movement in this smaller fishing pond, and that was a bit of a challenge. And what I ended up doing, I actually did it by mistake, and I'd like your feedback. When you see the finished product, let me know how you think it turned out. But I ended up just using that Woodland Scenics murky water, and before it completely dried, I added in some Woodland Scenics brush strokes of water effects, which is another liquid compound. And then after that all dried, then I added the water ripples, and it gives the illusion of water movement, kind of white caps on the pond. So you have to let me know what you think of that. Here I'm just adding in some gravel around it, around the lake. I'm just using regular paving sand actually, and I find that for an HO scale, it's the perfect scale for rocks and sand on HO. There's a little bit too much glue being used there. Here's the deep pour water, the murky type from Woodland Scenics. And there you can see I poured that in, and then I added those brush strokes of the water effects. And then once that dried, I added in the water ripples. And the combination of those two things, once it all dried, it really gave this little pond the motion that I was looking for some wind going across the water. Okay, so I've got the gravel parking lot laid in. And of course, at the end of every gravel parking lot, there's usually big rocks that outline it if you go to a public park. So that's what I'm doing here. Handpicked all of these little rocks and placing them in right on top of the glue. That took a while, but it turned out pretty nice. Then I had to seal it down a little bit, spraying it with a solution of 50% water, 50% scenic glue, and that helps seal things up. And this is what it looks like as I'm putting it together. You can see I've got a fishing scene here. You can see a guy playing his guitar. That's me in the park. And other folks enjoying the day at picnic benches. So I'm getting the scene kind of set up here around this little fishing pond. And then some other things that we used to do at the park is when I was a teenager, we would drive our cars to the park and wash them. Don't ask me why, but that's where we washed our cars, was in the public park. So we have a scene of some kids out here washing the car. Well, now it's time to insert that scene in that template into the scene on the benchwork by the track. And the same problem here that I had with the other scenes. You have to be very careful. I have all these wires from the lights that I have to run down holes that I've drilled in the benchwork to where all the connectors are below. So you got to be really careful how you hook all that. And it looks like my measurements were pretty good. This is giving me a nice snug fit here, so it's looking good. Over the next several days, I did some additional work, touch-up work on the scene. After I installed the template, I added some ballast around by the track, still working on some of those details. But here you see the fishing pond scene, and I just love how the light is hitting the water there. I think that's a really good look. Got our cars in, have our grill and chill camper, and I'll be working on some more details here along the side of the track that you'll see a little bit later. But again, about 85% of it is done. Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed watching it half as much as I enjoyed making it. And my next project is to add 2 more train lines to the existing layout. So keep an eye out for future videos on that. Thanks again for watching.